Alors bonjour à toutes et à tous, bonjour aux internautes, puisque vous savez qu'on est en ligne et qu'on peut nous suivre.
Good afternoon to you all. You know that we are online. We can be listened to live. There'll be a translation into French, English and German. So if you want to listen to the translation, you can. So we have a round table here. I would like to introduce our colleague Thomas Weitz, who's an Austrian colleague. You know that Austria has always been fiercely anti-nuclear. They always refused nuclear power plants, but given that there was a new taxonomy, you know that nuclear energy and gas are to be classified in the future in green investments. So we will see now what Austria will do in this regard. So now Marie Toussaint, my colleague in Europe Ecology, the Greens, she's working on energy. She's part of the ENVI committee. And of course with her we'll speak about nuclear energy. And the one I'm going to introduce to you now is absolutely outstanding. He's an outstanding guest. And he is Bernard Laponche. Bernard Laponche, many people like you. Many more should like you. Bernard is a long story. Bernard has come from Polytechnics. He's been working at the Cigéo. Now it is the Commission for Future Energies. He was Dominique Vonnes's advisor. He fought, and it's interesting because historically the story of the Bure underground laboratory dates back from that time, and he's part of Global Chance. I will give you the results of a survey he carried out about all the storage sites that exist everywhere in the world. I admire Bernard because he's really skilled. He's really very knowledgeable. If you ask him, if you invite him to come to a meeting in a very remote place in France to discuss nuclear energy, well, he actually shows up, even in Strasbourg. So he's a great knowledge resource. Now we also have Leila Chabi. She belongs to La France Insoumise. She works on nuclear issues as well. A little bit, well, quite a bit actually. And we will have Mathilde Panot, who will join us via a video conference link, and François Zing, who will tell us about the issue of the Aarhus and Espoo Conventions. A few introductory words. I'm very happy to have you here. Because we always wanted to invite citizens to the European Parliament. We don't want the European Parliament to be only for MEPs. We want citizens to join us to try and get more information from extraordinary people like Bernard and others. But we want you to see what's happening in this house, because in this house many things are being decided and they have to do with Europe energy policies, even though energy choices are national decisions, but decisions about the energy mix and energy policies, and we see it very clearly in everything related to climate, all this is decided here. Then we have another topic, and it's not the first time we organize conference about Cigéo, about the storage of radioactive waste. It is a site for storage storing radioactive waste. We had a conference to discuss the relevance, whether it was useful, whether it was a good idea or a democratic choice. Well, we will do this time too. We will take a closer look at Cigéo. We will also look at other sites in the world, in the States, in Germany. They have lots of problems, but the project is being sold to us as the solution for the management of radioactive waste. Then we will also tell you about the position of the European Commission, and the most nuclearized place in Europe is France. With this current event, which is the new taxonomy, given the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, we thought it had made people aware that nuclear energy could actually be used as weapons. And the Envy and Econ committees had voted against the taxonomy. That is, against including gas and nuclear energy in green energies. And there was an incredible lobbying at the European Parliament. And France looked for allies everywhere for them to vote, for everybody to vote on the inclusion of nuclear energy in the taxonomy. The lobbying was absolutely excessive. And now the goal is to find out whether European tools or international tools, whether the Espoo Convention or the Aarhus Convention or the non-respect of the directive about environmental impact could be used. We want to find out if these tools could be used to block the system, because if we're here, it means that we want to block the system. We don't want to accept storing that radioactive waste 500 meters deep, because we still don't know the kind of waste and the amount of waste that is to be stored down there. It could be spent fuel for APRs too. So we don't know yet what it is going to be exactly. So we will have to find out. I know that associations have taken legal action, but we have to find out what we can do at our level. The Espoo Convention is very important because it includes cross-border countries. And we have Luxembourgese citizens, the Belgians, the Swiss, the Germans. We have many people behind us. I'm not going to speak for any longer, but I would like this debate to be constructive. It is going to be very informative, and I would like to thank our lawyer, Mr. Dissent, for being with us. But at the end of this meeting, we needed to be able to consider possible actions. And it is true, we have lost certain battles, but we have not lost the war yet. I'm going to give the floor now to Leila. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Michel. I'm Leila Shaibi. I'm no specialist at all of nuclear energy. I am an MEP from the France Insoumise Party, and I work on social and employment affairs, and also work in the Constitutional Affairs Committee on the issues of transparency and lobbying. And I entirely agree with Michel. It feels good to see citizens in this European Parliament, because lobbyists really feel at home here. I know that there is a group of people among you who had trouble getting in and being accredited. But here in this parliament, the MEPs are elected by the citizens. The lobbies don't even have a card. They do have a card. They can move in and out of the parliament freely, whether here in Strasbourg or in Brussels. They feel really at home. And that is felt in the political decisions that are made. So thank you very much for being here with us. Thank you very much for making the voices of the citizens heard. And thank you so much to all the activists who come from Bure and who are really involved in the organization of this event. Thank you very much to you all for having come this far. And don't hesitate to come on a regular basis to make your voices heard. Thank you very much to Michel Rivasi for the organization of this event. And thank you very much to Marie-Alix Verhoeven, who spent a long time in contact with my team, and there was a lot of work previous to the organization of this event. As Michel said, the war situation we experience currently make us understand that we cannot play with nuclear energy as it was a game. With the Zaporizhzhia issue, makes us understand that it is a serious issue. Nuclear technology is really too dangerous to be used lightly and to keep being harnessed. And the struggle around Cigéo is the example of malfunctions and the dangers surrounding nuclear energy. So I'm surrounded by experts, so I'm not going to explain things you already know, but it seems like it is a technological fleeing away. We don't know what to do with the waste, so let's bury them. So it's a parody of democracy. And I would like to thank you once again. We read the articles in the press that clearly show that there is a criminalization of those who fight Cigéo, the activists who fight Cigéo. And they are even being monitored as if they were terrorists in the framework of a project that completely disrespects democracy and democratic principles. So congratulations for your position, congratulations for your disagreement, congratulations for your struggle. As we saw it in other situations, such as in the, for example, in the Notre-Dame-des-Landes airport issue, I hope we will end up with the same kind of mobilization and the same kind of success. It's been the goal of this conference to mobilize all the tools available and all the legal tools available within the legal texts among the legal texts of the European Union. And I must announce that I apologize because at 3 o'clock I have another meeting we call Strasbourg actually. These weeks in which we have the plenary sessions of the European Parliament in Strasbourg, because everything is very concentrated. We have meeting after meeting. So I won't be able to stay with you until the end, but I hope I'll be able to watch the video of the rest of the conference. So thank you very much for being here, really. Thank you, Leila. I'm going to give the floor straight away to Thomas. Thomas is Austrian, is anti-nuclear. What can we do, Thomas? Thank you, Michel. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. My French is not too good, so I'm going to speak English. And so you can listen to the translation if you need it. So the French listeners should press 3, but not switch on their mics, preferably.
Austria is nuclear free. Well, Austria is not a big country. Nuclear power plants. Oh, didn't it work? Okay. Okay, I begin again. Alors, so yes, as Michel mentioned, I'm Austrian, and Austria is a nuclear-free country. But unfortunately, this is, well, if you look at the map, this is not helping us all too much because Austria is surrounded by nuclear power plants. Some of them still of Soviet construction, like Bohunice. Je fais rien. Ça marche? Alors. They don't want to hear my criticism. So some of the nuclear power plants are Russian-built, so Russian technology, as Bohunice and Temelin in Czech Republic and Slovakia. Some of them are newly rebuilt, like Paksh, with Russian loans, Rosatom building it, and Russian technology in Hungary. Some of them directly on one of the most dangerous earthquake lines, like the one in Slovenia, owned by Slovenia and Croatia, Krško. They also tried to build a second block. Even in Austria, there's some campaign and some push by industry to portray nuclear energy as CO2-free and as environmental friendly. Well, we know it's not true. It's the mining that causes emissions, it's the building that causes emissions, it's the water issue where you have a massive impact on the environment, and the question is, can you sustain the cooling in times of global warming? We've seen this year in France what problem it has. But what does that mean if you have an accident, if there's war? 2 years ago everybody said, yes, war. Yes, war. If you have a war or if you have a terrorist attack, and then it's about the waste, which is a problem that has never been solved. I'm not going to go more in detail because you have better experts here on the panel we will all listen to. So it's clear, nuclear energy is dangerous to humans, to nature, to our environment, basically to our whole planet. What we've seen here in the European Parliament was a shady background deal between Macron, Merkel, still Merkel, and some Eastern European states. The deal was, Merkel said, we need cheap gas from Russia. Help us with that. Help us make gas green. And Macron said, oh, I need urgently some investments into my nuclear sector because it's all broken down and I need international money and investors for that. Let's make nuclear green. And so they made a shady background deal involving some Eastern European countries, which led to this delegated act by the Commission. This delegated act we consider as illegal, because the Commission cannot take far-reaching political decisions by a delegated act. This has to go to a normal lawmaking procedure through the Parliament. So they were circumventing the Parliament, and they knew that this is a shady deal. That's why they brought it up and legally proposed it on the 31st of December at 11 o'clock in the evening, while we were all opening or waiting to open champagne for the New Year's celebration. When it came to negotiations in the Parliament, it became a bit strange, because what we were practically doing is that we were debating whether gas, but today we talk about nuclear, is green or not. While, you know, I have to accept as a Democrat and as a parliamentarian that there's different opinions. But on the question whether nuclear falls under the principle of do no harm, and this is a legal principle we have to follow, on that question, there is no question of opinions or debate. It's clearly a technology that does not fit under the principle of do no harm. So it cannot be considered green technology. Still, the vote was proceeding, or we were going close to the vote, and all of us in the Green Group, and many more, were running and talking to other members to have, you know, not to change their opinion, whether they're pro-nuclear or anti-nuclear, but to bind them on the actual factual arguments, on the facts. I can live with decisions here in the House that show different majorities and different opinions. But what was really difficult for me to accept is that the majority of members here are voting in favor of something against every factual basis and every scientific knowledge. And this was due to massive lobbying, but also to massive pressure from their member states and to massive pressure also by industry. This was leading us to the conclusion that we need to fight that on the next level. Just yesterday in the URI committee, which is the legal committee, there was a vote taken not to go to court against the Commission on the fact that this delegated act was circumventing the Parliament. Well, if the Parliament accepts the Commission to do politics via delegated acts, we're kind of cutting off our arms and legs by ourselves. This was a disappointing decision. But at least the Austrian government and the whole Austrian government was taking the decision to sue the Commission, because we legally checked, and we are sure that our legal arguments on all different levels will respond in the European Court of Justice. And together with Luxembourg, we're filing the court case against the Commission. The deadline is the 10th of October. It's ready to come, it's ready prepared, and we're going to fight it all the way to the end for the citizens, for our planet, and for fact-based and legally based decisions. Thank you.
C'est très important.
Thank you. What you just said is very important, Thomas, because we have lost at the scientific level, because taxonomy was about scientific criteria. They have been put aside and replaced by purely political aspects with this deal with Germany and France. And now all we have left is justice, and we'll see whether the European Court of Justice is ready to recognize the fact that gas and nuclear energy should not be included in this green taxonomy for energy. And if we win this battle with the justice, then this will be very important for the future of the nuclear energy, because if we do not have the European funds to relaunch all the reactors that Macron would like to see, then it will have consequences. So that's very important. Mathilde, can you hear us? Mathilde Panot. Have you heard the previous speakers? Yes, I heard everything. Well, great. Thank you very much. You have the floor, Mathilde. Well, good afternoon to all of you. And I would like to say first that I'm very sorry that I was not able to join you today, but we had discussion at the National Assembly and it was impossible for me to travel. I would like to thank Michel Rivasi for organizing this meeting, and I would like to thank Angélique Huguin and the group fighting against Cigéo. I would like to thank all the members of parliament who are sitting around this table. I believe it's very important to organize this meeting today at the European Parliament for two reasons. First, in France, they are following this fait accompli policy, and they declared this summer that this Cigéo project was of public utility, and they're really moving forward on this file. And the second reason why I'm delighted to see this meeting at European Parliament level, it's because we can say that Cigéo is not a local project that only concerns the Meuse or the eastern region. No, it will have consequences on the whole country. And if Cigéo does not happen, then everything that is being discussed about the energy and the nuclear energy project and the waste management sites that are full will not be able to go on. They will not be able to go on without this Cigéo project. And the third important fact is that nuclear energy was taken away from democracy because there are no debates about this issue, because you have strong repression against the opponents to the nuclear burying site in Bure. I'd like to remind you of the figures. We had about 20 searches throughout 2018, 2019, we had about 50 legal proceedings and one proceeding against 7 opponents to the nuclear waste site. Messages were collected and they correspond to 16 hours of tapping, and we have also mobile police forces that were mobilized, and inhabitants are always controlled. And Bure is seen as a laboratory for police repression. So we have this strong repression that prevents democratic discussions and democratic choices about this topic, and France is the only country in Europe that has not achieved its objectives in terms of sustainable and renewable energy sources. And I'm also the sponsor of a nuclear subcontracting company because many subcontractors are involved. It may sound strange, but they're actually facing the same problems. When they talk about their working conditions and the security of nuclear reactors, they also face repression because one of the subcontractors gave a testimony about the difficulties they were facing, and he was dismissed by the nuclear company. And I know that this meeting also aims at finding clear and straightforward solutions. And in the National Assembly, we also went to Bure. We decided to go to the Bure site in order to see the situation on the ground, to see the wood, the forest that they would like to destroy to build the waste nuclear site. And we know that we have 115 members of parliament who signed a declaration in order to create this parliamentary group against Cigéo, and I think it would be interesting to send it to all MEPs so that we have this strong front and so that people are ready to fight this struggle and to win this battle, and will use the European Parliament, the Senate and the National Assembly to make sure that this project is a failure. And to conclude, I would like to come back to the issue of democracy, because we're talking about a project that is impacting human civilization. And I'm not sure if you know about this book talking about an 800-kilometer walk to the site in the Meuse region where they want to bury those waste. And he says there is less time between our generation and Homo sapiens, who drew a mammoth on the wall, and between our generation and the next generation, when radioactive waste, nuclear waste, will no longer be radioactive. So they're really adopting this fait accompli policy, and this is not acceptable when you look at the consequences. So I would like to thank you again for organizing this meeting against Cigéo, and I wish you very successful exchanges, of course. Thank you. Thank you, Mathilde, for this intervention. And I didn't know that there was this parliamentary group against Cigéo. I didn't know that. And as European members of parliament, we will join that group. And we will seize this opportunity to say that this is not a national problem. It is an international problem, European problem. Very good. Now, to conclude on this first part of the meeting, I'd like to hand over to Marie Toussaint. Thank you, Michel. Thank you very much. Good afternoon to all of you. From time to time, I have the opportunity to say this. Some of you may have heard me before, but I'm sitting next to Bernard Laponche and Michel Rivasi, so I would like to say that the battle against nuclear energy started a long time ago in France, and we owe a lot to the struggle and the efforts made by men and women who had to resist for so many years. And I would like to thank you very much for your help, for your efforts. And I'm delighted to see that we have people belonging to my generation here in this room. And it's true that we turned to other struggles. We fought for the planet against climate change, and we thought that the end of the nuclear power would actually come quite naturally, but that was a mistake. That was a big mistake, and we believe that we need to start this battle again and again. And you have made these efforts with a lot of talent and expertise, and I hope that we will be up to your efforts and your expectations. So I would like to thank you once again for this struggle, and we will make sure that we go on with this struggle. So unfortunately, I have another meeting. I was supposed to tell you about the issue of access to justice. So I'm very sorry. I never heard of this expression, Strasbourg, but I may keep it indeed. It's quite relevant. But of course, I must say that we haven't lost this battle and we haven't lost the war. And I believe that justice can help us. And here I'm referring to the climate issues. I'm the founding member of Notre Affaire à tous. But if we want to win these battles, we need to move forward little by little. And this summer we had beautiful decisions from the National Council, the State Council, and we see that rights are moving forward. And at European level, in other national courts, there are court decisions that can also support this opportunity. Thomas said that he was certain about the legal Austrian arguments, and it shows that when you get mobilized, you can really change things, and courts and tribunals can help us. Now, sometimes it's more complicated at European level, and I can give you the example of climate justice. We accompanied and supported about 10 families to go against the climate policy of the EU, and the Court of Justice said that according to the European treaties, you need to be directly concerned. And it's true that these families were directly concerned by climate change, but you also need to be concerned individually. And that's where the problem lies, as the court said, because you may be directly concerned, but we are all concerned. So you cannot consider that you are individually concerned. So you can see that we still have a lot on our plates to move ahead with this struggle and to make sure that our rights are defended. In France, we have many things to do and to change. Michel talked about the different legislation. France is lagging behind with all the issues related to the legislation, and we can see that the French government is not obeying most of the European legislation about the protection of the environment. And we need to move ahead with the European legislation. And for the Cigéo project, I believe many things can be done. We can defend the availability of all studies and assessments for the public. I believe you know that. Since you're working on the ground, there is an obligation to communicate information about the evaluations and studies. We need to have transparency about the studies, and then we need to know who carried out the studies, with what money, with what funds, to make sure that we have independent experts. We need to have public consultations that are genuine. And all of this is recognized in French legislation and under the European law. So we need to use these arguments. The second topic that we really need to look into is the issue of the criminalization of the defenders. In France, it was said that anti-nuclear activists were considered as terrorists almost. In 2013, they said there are three enemies: the jihadists, we agree on that, then the regionalists, and then finally the environmentalists. And We have seen that with all the arrangements and provisions adopted by the French government. This is the philosophy of the policy of the government when it comes to environmental actions. And we can see how they react when we want to question the agribusiness sector. And the Aarhus Convention is a convention for which the EU is a member, of course, and one of the defenders can now be appointed by the UN to act at the level of the states who signed the convention. And this UN defender could act against companies and their decisions, companies located on our territory. And I was thinking of the action of Total Energy in Uganda. Now, of course, we have someone in that position, but we also need a budget. So we need to make sure that we introduce the right amendments to have the right budget. That person is French, so we need to get in touch with him. And then we'll also work on a directive to protect whistleblowers. I believe that this is something that you can also activate. Now, there have been many legal success stories, and I do not want to be too long because, of course, it will be up to you to take the floor and speak up. But I would like to tell you that we also need to fight for environmental protection, environmental health. These are collective actions we need to introduce. We also need to change treaties. I told you about the problem of the European Court of Justice, and this is related to the lack of budget for justice. And the situation is the same in France. If you do not have the budget, the justice cannot do its work. So we need to look into the provisions that could be included in our treaties, the environmental treaties, the right to a healthy environment, the right to protect nature. We also need to recognize the rights of nature. And of course, we should not struggle to achieve GDP and growth only. We also need to respect social rights, human rights, and the limits of our planet. We have mobilized, we still have a lot on our plate, but we will make sure that this is a success in the future. Thank you.
Moi, j'avais envie de dire le droit à la vie.
Yes, and the right to life. Because when we talk about nuclear waste, for me, this can be considered as the right to death. But we want to talk about the right to live, the right to life. So now we're going to move on to a more practical intervention about these burial sites. And Bernard is going to take the floor and give you a comparison of different sites existing throughout the world. And I believe he has slides. And before I forget, you have also received, or you can have access to this document, including all this comparative study. So I have a few copies here, and if you're interested, feel free to grab one at the end of the meeting. All right, good afternoon. Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Should I speak closer to the microphone? All right. Thank you very much. Good afternoon. I was invited to this conference, and I was asked to show you, to tell you about an international study to know what is happening in other countries outside of France, because we have talked about Cigéo. And I spent quite a long time to carry out this survey, this study, to understand what is happening in different countries. And you can see the website on the slide where you can have access to this study. I looked into the United States, Belgium, Switzerland, Sweden, Finland. This is an in-depth study. And then I also looked into the United Kingdom, China, Germany, and Japan. So this is not a comprehensive study, but it can give you an overview of various projects and behaviors or attitudes Now, of course, the technical aspects are very complex, and these are adopted and looked into by other projects and studies. But here we really wanted to know what is happening in other countries. And I found this very interesting because I had a vague idea of the topic, but this study enabled me to understand that more deeply. And the first question is to know what we are actually talking about. We're talking about high and medium level, long-lived radioactive waste. So the waste produced by reactors producing electricity. So we're not looking into military waste, we're only looking at that type of waste. So that should be covered by the Cigéo project. Is it the same situation everywhere? Well, no. In other countries, the fuel that is used in reactors can be placed in a pool because it is radioactive, and that's it. So the final waste is this fuel. And you have uranium rods, and they include extremely dangerous material, plutonium, and radioactive products that will remain radioactive during thousands or even millions of years. In other countries, the situation is different because these countries decided to focus on military nuclear power, and they developed techniques to produce plutonium for the bomb. Then they decided to use that for breeder reactors, and those countries followed this military approach, including the United Kingdom and France. And so the final waste is a mixture between plutonium, and people never talk about that. We have tons of plutonium, 80 tons in 2021, so that's quite significant. And then you have other products that are vitrified in glass products, and they can be quite comparable to the radiated fuel. So we're producing a lot of waste. And so you have that glass and the fuel. And then you have a mixed situation in some countries. Countries that said, well, maybe the military option is interesting. Belgium and Switzerland were in that situation. And they decided to reprocess the fuel in Germany and in France during a short period of time, but they had to deal with that waste. And Germany and Japan could not have military programs because of the Second World War, and they focused on breeder reactors using plutonium. And they reprocess their waste in France. And you may have heard of that waste that has to come back from Japan. So this is the situation that we have. It is quite different. And the most atypical cases are the United States, because they had a huge military program with waste in Oxford. And it's like a nuclear dustbin, and it's going to take centuries to dismantle that. And then you have the electricity companies, the civil nuclear power, who do not care about plutonium. They will only focus on irradiated fuel. So you have this military approach and the electricity producing companies that say, well, you know, after irradiated fuel, it's too complicated. And they have more and more nuclear powers that are stopping in the United States for economic reasons. And then the United Kingdom did not manage waste at all. So they only are covered in a small chapter because they have a center called the CFIL, and waste is just accumulating and prime ministers still do not want to look into this. That's quite worrying.
Vous avez déjà changé. Bravo. Enfin, vous avez lu, donc je passe à la suivante. Alors, bon, ça, c'est qu'on connaisse à peu près les colis. Qu'est-ce que c'est que ces déchets?
I've read the slide, so I can move on to the one that is on the screen right now. What do we do now with that waste? It is quite interesting because in the military time, well, in wartime, the bomb has to be produced and waste were not a concern. They were just thrown away. Now, in France, and in other countries too, military affairs were nuclear, part nuclear and part civil, and secrecy covered the development of that industry. And it's still the case nowadays. And a solution had to be found for the waste, for storing the waste, or getting rid or disposing of the waste. So the first solution invented by Francis Perrin was to drop the waste to the bottom of the sea. And indeed, it's the easiest solution. You take the waste on a boat and then drop it, let it fall to the bottom of the sea. In the Gulf of Biscay, it was done. Then a few scientists and honest people started thinking, well, at the bottom of the sea, well, the sea is salty. The salt oxidizes the metal, so it's dangerous. So it was banned. And somebody else had a great idea and thought, well, as we cannot drop them in the sea, we are going to bury them in the earth, in the ground. And I witnessed that evolution. And all of a sudden, burying the waste became the solution. As some time before, the sea, dropping them in the sea, seemed to be the obvious situation, the solution. So there was a committee, the Castin committee in France, who said, well, we have to study that possibility, but it must be reversible. We must be able to change our minds and take them out of the ground, take the waste out of the ground. So it became the policy of the country. Well, everybody said, well, the solution is deep landfill. So a few countries decided to do that, and they set up underground labs. Belgium, Sweden, Switzerland, and China, just to study geological layers and find out if it could be a solution or not. The other countries are looking for a site, the states in particular. They've been looking for a site for a long time and they still haven't found it, and we'll see why. And that's where we are. There are countries with underground labs, and there are countries where they ended up choosing a landfill site. That was the case of Sweden after lots of research, Finland and Switzerland. Back, please. Thank you. But Switzerland was an issue because after everybody rejected the waste, the site chosen in Switzerland is very close to the German border. And the German Chancellor very diplomatically said that it was not an ideal situation. So the only project which building has just started is Finland. So what has aroused my interest in all this? Because I had to read lots of documents. It was interesting. It was a lot of work. Well, there are technical issues, but also governance issues and opposition issues. So how is it being done? So in France, you know how it's been done. There are major differences in the decision-making processes. And the most interesting comparison is between Sweden and Finland. They chose granite. They used a spent fuel, irradiated fuel, not very complicated, and Sweden did a remarkable job, carried out many studies. They studied the different rock layers. They did everything. But their very long-lasting, time-consuming, democratic decision-making process, well, made progress step by step. In Finland, they adopted the Swedish technique, the Swedish storage technique, the copper container and a type of rock. Because in Finland, the country is very much pro-nuclear. And they trust the companies and the engineers. And you will see that in the report there is a very interesting part written by a philosopher who says that. He says in Finland there is an unaccounted for trust in the authorities and in the companies and in the engineers. So, but this kind of storage has all the faults of this kind of storage, and there was no opposition. So between centralized and decentralized countries, the decision-making processes are very different. It's very different from the situation that we can see in France. Scientific and technical opposition is very variable. There are countries where there is no such opposition. There are countries where there are scientists, physicians, well, physicists, very well-known academics, who said that it wouldn't work because there were different risks, flood risks, the presence of hydrogen, and there was the realization that we don't know, and that's very important. When experts from Andra tell you, well, in 100,000 years, in 10,000 years, the storage will be impeccable and there will be without danger, well, they don't know. It's a lie. I'm not saying that they deliberately lie, but they don't really know. And that growing awareness among scientists about the uncertainties clearly shows that a scientist who used to assert certain things, are not do not have better ethics than others. So the opposition to the sites is very often coming from the people. But the politicians are very often bribed. And politicians, whether at the local, regional, national level, are bribed or are persuaded to approve the projects, the side projects. And there are other countries where at the local level there is a lot of opposition, and that's the case of Switzerland. Now the fourth kind of opposition which is very different. It is ethical dissent. There are many people who are not against the nuclear energy, but they find it unacceptable to leave that as a legacy to future generations. Landfills 500 meters deep that are then covered . and for which there is no going backwards. What are we going to do then in 100 years' time if people change their minds? Are we going to dig 100 meters deep or 500-meter deep holes to extract the radioactive waste? There is also a risk of hydrogen-based explosions. So saying that we just bury the waste and don't speak about it anymore is unacceptable. And many people are opposed to those projects on those grounds. So as I didn't have much time, I don't think I can speak for much longer, but the conclusion, well, is kind of my conclusion, but it is based on this study. So far, I haven't expressed any opinion, but as a conclusion, after carrying out this survey, I can say that if we look at all those countries and what the scientists in those countries say, in France, we don't find many critical scientists, but in other countries there are many. Well, this burying or landfill solution was praised by our politicians. But my conclusion is that there is no satisfactory solution in scientific and technical terms, or in ethical and democratic terms. And if it is not satisfactory, the solution should certainly not be irreversible. So it's totally stupid. And we can see that with all the other projects. There are other cases of countries which are quite close, where people say, well, if it is the only solution, but it's not satisfactory, but the hole has to be covered, has to be closed, and will be very difficult to open again, it can't be done. And the first thing to do is to stop producing the waste. In Austria, in Italy, in Germany, in Sweden, in Switzerland, they have decided to stop producing radioactive waste and producing nuclear energy. It makes the situation easier. They decide to wait. They say, well, irradiated flue will be taken out of the nuclear power plants. They'll be locked up in steel or concrete containers there on the very side of the nuclear power plant, and we wait until with this respectable solution while we wait for a true satisfactory solution in the long run. Let's not rush into an unsatisfactory solution. So if you wait and see, and that's what Marcos Buser, who's a very interesting Swiss geologist, he says, well, if we're not sure, let's not do it. A safe and careful management of existing waste can only be done by secure dry storage in concrete containers. And these concrete containers are sold in the United States by Orano. So it is secure dry storage, no water there, and they can be stored in sheds, protected by a hill, for example, a place where people can go and monitor the storage, because the existing nuclear storage sites will have to be monitored any case. So we have time. We have to wait and ask our physicists and Nobel Prizes. We have one. We have to make him work and tell them, well, you have 200 years, dear physicists, work on that, please. Find a satisfactory solution for us. we can certainly ask them to work and look for a solution for our radioactive waste. Thank you. Thank you very much, Bernard, for enlightening us and for carrying out this study for this conference. Now we can move on about nuclear waste in France, the status of the situation. We have Roland Desbordes with us, but I don't think his connection is very great. Roland, can you hear us? I hear you. I can hear you very well. I'm quite far removed from Strasbourg. It was difficult for me to establish the connection, but thanks to the help of a technician from the Parliament, we made it. Well, you asked CRERA to tell you about radioactive waste, but not the ones that were on which Bernard focused. There are low volumes, but they are highly active. What we see in CRERA, an independent environmental lab, are not this kind of waste. We have lower rates of activity, lower levels, but ours are very long-lived. Because there are many different kinds of waste, and I think it's a good idea to look at the different solutions. Next slide, please. I'm not in control of the slides. If you look at the fuel cycle, this is an Areva presentation, which I chose. Well, the nuclear power plant is clearly seen here, but we don't see what happens before that and after that. Everything starts at the extractive site of uranium, not in France, because we import 100% of our uranium. There is a very long transport time before it reaches France, near Narbonne, where many activists are now fighting against that plant, which is not perfect, far from it. So we'll come back to the Malvasi plant, and Pierre Latte produces the waste. There is the factory where the fuel is produced, and then the nuclear power plant and the reprocessing plant, which is the most polluting factory in the world. And what do they do there? Well, they reprocess the waste of our nuclear power plants and from a few other nuclear power plants from outside our country. Well, first of all, what is a radioactive waste? A waste is a radioactive waste is a radioactive matter for which there is no possible reuse, or no reuse is considered. But if some reuse is considered, we speak about radioactive matter and not, or material, and not radioactive waste. And that qualification has taken out of the range of radioactive waste a number of materials which are waste for us, because there are no solutions for their reuse, and they have to be seen as waste. So it is a present made to future generations, because they will have to manage that waste too. So they are classified according to two criteria: the life duration and the level of activity, whether they produce a lot of radioactivity or not. So the half-life is less than 30 years. So that's in that case they are short-lived. Over 30 years is long-lived. They have to be monitored for about 300 years, and after 300 years their radioactivity will have been divided by 1000. It may seem huge, but if their radioactivity is high, it could be a real issue, even though it is divided by 1000. Excuse me, I have a battery issue here. I had plugged my computer in a plug that doesn't work. I have to move now.
Je vous avais prévenu qu'il y avait des problèmes.
I warned you about such problems. Because now we can't see you anymore and we can't hear you anymore.
Bon. On n'a pas le temps de la pause.
There's no time for a break. Sorry. Well, should we give the floor to the next speaker? So, we don't know how long it will take to solve the problem, you know. We don't know how long it will take our technicians to solve this technical issue. So we're going to move on to the next speaker because we have Dr. Dorte Fouquet, who's a lawyer at Becker Butner, who is supposed to tell us about the implementation of the conventions, the Aarhus and the Espoo conventions. So I'm going to give her the floor, and then we'll turn back to Roland Desbordes once he's connected. So, Mrs. Fouquet, you have the floor. You're going to tell us about the illustration of the implementation of conventions with other European examples. Good afternoon. Now, can you hear us? Can you hear me? Yes, we can hear you. We can hear you. Yes. All right. Great. Thank you. I would like to give you a short intervention, but first and foremost, I would like to thank you, Michel. I believe this is the second time I was invited to a meeting at European level about Cigéo, and I'm always impressed to see all of your activities, and especially today because I see that young people took the floor. Young people are involved at a legal level, and I believe that's very important. Now, very briefly, I'd like to focus on very practical aspects. We have European directives, we have international conventions at the UN level. Michel told you about the Aarhus and Espoo conventions. These are conventions that the French state, other member states of the EU and other countries signed. And since 1991 or 1998, these conventions were signed a long time ago, so they're not newborns. They should be known, well known in the French legislation. And next to these conventions, we also have a European directive, the European Directive on public and private projects that can have an impact on the environment. We also have other directives such as the Flow for Habitat, the directive on birds. So we have a wide variety of legal tools. So we need to file a case in front of the court against France because it is not respecting this wide variety of legal instruments. And as Michel said, and as the group against Cigéo said on repeated occasions, France does not respect the right to access to information, and it does not respect the right to study and reduce the impact on the environment. And as Mr. Laponge said, we have the same problems everywhere, especially in countries that use nuclear power. Now, some countries use nuclear energy in medicine, but that is not significant, of course. And France is being isolated now in a club that is really saddening. And Germany has the same problems. Germany also needs to find a storage site that should be reversible. So that problem does not stop at borders. But what have they done? They completed the process to find a site. So they're still looking at Germany. There are different stages, and I work for the board, and we have a legislation that is related to the procedure to apply research and to involve the public. And there is a bus, a coach, that travels from site to site in Germany so that people can have direct access to information. And of course, they can also go to the internet, and that's very important. Then the European Court of Justice, as it was said before, is not against us. Sometimes it can help us. In the case 411, dating back to 2017, this was a case about Belgium. It was not about waste, but about the possibility to prolong the life of nuclear power stations in Belgium. But there was no environmental impact assessment, and the court followed the general lawyer, Mrs. Cocotte, who did a great job, and the court in its decision stated that for major projects in light of the Aarhus Convention, the Espoo Convention and our directive, it is essential to have a procedure to inform the public, an appropriate procedure. And not only for cross-border issues. In this case, related to Belgium, I represented the two federal states in Germany, Rhenania-Palatinate and Rhenania-Westphalia North. And we went all the way to the Council of State in Belgium. And we got a very good decision, a very good response from the court. And they highlighted the facts that we can use when we lodge a complaint. But it's very important to involve the European Commission. As we have seen with taxonomy, the Commission is playing at two levels. In France, in the energy sector, they seem to be very slow in the decision-making process. It's a very long process in French regions. But they did not even turn to France. And the Commission has to start discussions with France and analyze the situation to see whether there is an infringement or not. And that wasn't done, and that's very concerning because this is an issue related to human rights. And we've heard about criminalization of opponents. So, of course, this is a national situation. But this is something that should get all of our attention. Now, I do not want to be too long. And I would like to be able to help our colleagues to file a case against the European Commission. I would like to help you. It will be my pleasure to support you in this process. Thank you.
Merci de...
Thank you very much for your contribution, because you gave us some avenues to explore. Now, Roland hasn't been able to come back to the meeting, so we're going to move on to the legal aspects of this discussion, because as you said, Dr. Fouquet. Yes?
La présentation de Roland.
So we have someone from the CRIRAD who can go on with Roland's presentation. All right, perfect. This is great. Thank you. This is a live meeting, as you can see.
Voilà, donc Roland Desbordes, tout à l'heure, vous parlez.
So Roland Desbordes was telling you about the radioactive period, the short and long period. Long meaning more than 30 years, and that's a very long period of time. Now, these radioactive waste are divided into 4 categories. Very low activity, but those products are already extremely radioactive. Then for the very weak activity, it means that it's under 100,000 becquerel, and that means that you have 100,000 disintegrations per second of radioactive waste. If you have low activity, it's more than 100,000 up to 1 billion becquerel per kilogram. For the next level, it's until 1,000 billion. And then for the high activity, it's more than 1,000 billion. And here we are really in colossal and huge activity levels. Now, this waste should be divided into 4 categories, but actually we have 3 categories. The TFA, then we have the low and medium level and long-lived radioactive waste, and the high and medium level long-lived radioactive waste. Now, officially, you can see here the waste that has been accounted for officially. So the low activity waste, 1 to 2 million cubic meters or more, and they are stored in Morvilliers. Then 1.3 million cubic meters in Soulaine. And the A waste have a low or medium level activity, but up to 1,000 billion becquerel. And then you have the B and C waste. So that's the waste that should be promised to Cigéo if that project is a reality. So I'm not as brilliant as Roland, but here you can see the mining waste. In France, we have uranium, and I'm not referring to the mines in Kazakhstan or Canada or other countries, but in France, we have low activity, long-lived waste, 52 million tons that are stored in the environment without protection. Then you have carbon-14 waste, medium level, long-lived. Here we also have huge quantities. They're studying the possibility to store the waste resulting from the very first reactors in Saint-Laurent-les-Eaux, Bure, and other sites. Then we have other waste not resulting from the electronuclear sector. And they're also studying the storage opportunities, which means that for the moment they don't know what to do with these radiferous waste. Then you have the Malvasi waste, so medium level, long-lived waste. There you have storage on site in Malvasi, 2 kilometers away from Narbonne, where you have a lot of sun, a lot of wind, so dust flowing all around the environment. Then you have the uranium, depleted uranium. resulting from the enrichment of uranium for nuclear power stations. We have more than 300,000 tons that are stored on sites in Tricastin and Bessines-sous-Gartemple, where we used to have uranium mines. And then we have the low activity, long-lived waste. Then we also have future waste resulting from the dismantling of the power stations, and the quantities will be huge, and we don't know for what sectors they will be destined or concerned. And at the beginning of the years 2000, it was said that it would be banned to use metals and concrete resulting from nuclear power stations to turn them into consumer goods or construction materials. Then in 2009, exemptions were introduced, and ever since January 2021, there is a decree that authorizes the recycling of that type of waste that could be used in the public field to produce products that can be used in your day-to-day life. Now, of course, it's easier to melt iron and to sell that waste to the industrialists instead of managing the waste sites like in Morvilliers. That costs a lot of money, whereas selling metals can actually make you earn some money. Now, of course, they will not be the right procedures for all waste, but for the very low activity waste, I believe that citizens should fight to make sure that this does not happen. There are two sites. You have Fessenheim next to Strasbourg and Tricastin. Next slide, please. I'm not sure. There's still a slide after that. Yes, there is another one. Well, I was telling you about this ban. That's what I told you about this battle that CRIRAD won at the time, so that it would be prohibited to use these metals and that type of concrete and other waste. But then there were exemptions introduced in 2009. But at the time, the reuse of that material and that waste was only for nuclear purposes and energy purposes. But now we could see that waste in our day-to-day lives. Is there another slide? Well, that's a graph. I'm also discovering the slides. So this is a list. Maybe I can give you some explanation about this. This is the Euratom Directive 2009/52, if I'm not mistaken, that defines these thresholds, and you do that for each radio element. But this directive cannot be imposed to the states. When people say the directive forces us to do this or that, that's not true. This is recommendation coming from Euratom. So once you have adapted your legislation, you can actually use frying pans made from radioactive waste if that does not include more than and that number of becquerel and iodine, etc. So that's the information coming from the directive. But France does not intend to apply this regulation or this recommendation from Euratom directly. It will do that on the global volume. So whatever the content in cobalt, carbon, plutonium, they will be able to produce frying pans resulting from that waste as long as we do not go beyond 1 millisievert per year. So if you use this frying pan every day, it's okay, but if you sleep on a bed made from frying pans, and if you have those frying pans in your car, of course, you could go above that threshold, but of course, these are only estimates. And here is Roland Desbordes. He's back.
Merci.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Jean-Marie, for taking over when I had a technical issue where we're addressing a topic which is essential for us within CRIRAD. Nuclear power plant operators have always dreamt about diluting the waste in the environment. They thought that these waste could be diluted in the environment, and that would be no problem for public health. That is sabotage. The mic of the previous speaker should be spent. Now, the narrative of the nuclear authority says now we have to look at it on a case-by-case basis. These practices have not been generalized, but it should be allowed batch per batch. But the operators say it won't work. If we want to start a whole sector of waste disposal, we need millions of tons every year to make it profitable. And we have looked at the case within CRIRAD, and I can tell you it is burning hot. And we have no guarantee at all. We have been promised that for the population it's a very low doses, but when we do our own calculations within CRIRAD, we realize it doesn't work. So we've launched a campaign. We have mobilized because so far the wolves were not coming out of the wood. But now industrials are starting to speak about it. You see why women don't like technical stuff. Very often we say that it is very often said that men are more technical than women. Well, there was an investigation carried out at the National Assembly about nuclear power plant investments. There was a huge difference between women and men. All the men thought that nuclear power plants were to be the solution to our energy issues. Not all of them, okay, not all of them, but a very large majority. I'm speaking to you, I'm speaking about the MPs of the National Assembly in the years 2000-2002, and women were much more hesitant. So if I don't see Roland coming back, I have to give the floor to Françoise Zinn. Because the question I'm asking to you now is, well, we've just looked at the Aarhus Convention and the Espoo Convention. Well, we've seen that these conventions have not been applied in France. But we have restarted, kept in operation old 40 to 50-year-old reactors. And in Belgium, there was the same dispute, and they won. They could use the Espoo Convention. So my question is about Cigéo. How can we use these international conventions about access to information, public involvement, access to justice? And in the framework of the Espoo Convention, it is involvement of bordering countries. We have several bordering countries. We have Luxembourg, we have Belgium, we have Germany, and we even have Switzerland. So let's try to block this process? Can you help us? I will try in a couple of minutes, because it's the equivalent of 1 year studying at our law faculty. Well, we spoke about the non-respect of both conventions, the Aarhus and Espoo Convention. Let me remind you that Aarhus is about information of the general public that is useful in due time and unbiased information. That information, so full and exhaustive information, that's very important, should be provided to the general public, but also the participation of the general public. We have the Aarhus Convention and also the European directives with the same level of requirement in terms of the effective participation of the general public in the decision-making process, when all the options are still open, and for the public to be able to influence the decision. And that's the whole issue. We have the Aarhus Convention, we have the European directives. Earlier, the issue of the influence of the lobbies on the law of the Union has been mentioned. And I want to tell you as a lawyer that the law of the European Union is also our exit door, is also our solution, and is also the instruments that are likely to help us under the control of the Court of Justice of the European Union. But we have the opportunity now to try and find out how we can use the European Court of Justice, where we can get some help. So we have those legal tools in mind, and you must know that France is the only country of the European Union that was found guilty of not conveying the right information. So, we have the Aarhus Convention. We have also the Espoo Convention. The Espoo is about the impact and the cross-border pollution. The text is not well drafted. It speaks about the likelihood that there will be an impact on another state. So it's been transposed in the law of the Union. But the tools, we have them. Let's see what we do with those tools. As far as the Aarhus Convention is concerned, so far, the Council of State had refused to take into account all the components of the Aarhus Convention, especially the part about the participation of the general public. The Council of State had refused to recognize its enforceability. It is the French position according to which nobody can use an international convention to oppose a project. But on the 15th of November 2021, the Council of State has changed its mind, and they said that the Aarhus Convention was directly enforceable. Opposable. So why am I speaking today? Because not only because I was part of the 5 lawyers who rose against the public interest nature of the project, and I was involved in another case, which is like the little sister of the Bure case. At the time, I had asked for the respect of the Espoo Convention because several tens of thousands of tons of radioactive waste and the Alsatian soil was not a good idea. So we have that idea that we can win those fights. But it's not only a legal fight here, and the Espoo and Aarhus Conventions have their importance within the European Parliament, because it is possible to take action. Well, it's very limited for the general public. The general public cannot take the committees to court. That's the limit of the Espoo Convention. But the internal judge is still responsible for the proper implementation of the Espoo Convention. But the states that could have an influence, that could use it, Luxembourg, Belgium, in the current state of our borders. It's important to specify this because 1,500 years ago it was a kingdom, and it was impossible to anticipate the landfill of highly radioactive waste. So we have a cross-border convention. And so we have this problem of borders, because we don't know whether the Meuse River and the Heiman River will remain French. So let's remember that we're working on an issue that will last for several hundreds of years, and even thousands of years. And I think that the provisions in Germany to guarantee the safety, the safety of the storage, require guaranteeing that safety of storage, secure storage for thousands of years. So we can use associative networks and political networks to demand that the Aarhus and Espoo Conventions are applied. What's the meaning of asking for participation? How about, what's the meaning? Why consult the Luxembourg population when the decision has already been made? It makes no sense. This is no effective participation of the general public. It's a pseudo-democracy, a fake democracy. And that's what's important today. Today, we can significantly use networks. And we cannot leave the management of nuclear energy to the French state and only to the French state. The other countries have to play their part too, but they have to be mobilized. In the Stockholm case, I mentioned the lack of respect, the disrespect for the Espoo Convention, but German politicians didn't budge. And the Minister of Ecology, the Ministry of Ecology, had told me, well, the French authorities have informed me of the situation. But what were you informed about? About the existence of a project? Well, I believe you, but did you get all the unbiased, exhaustive, and unbiased, properly analyzed information? So, of course, we are still fighting our legal battle. But we need to be creative. I know there are scientists here, and it's very, and you know, like as I do, that it's very difficult to translate the scientific requirements with all the scientific rigor needed. It's very difficult to translate that into something that can be understood by judges and magistrates, because magistrates are not technicians. And magistrates, if they really want to do something, but it's starting to move because we have a new generation with a stronger environmental culture. And that's the point of networks, precisely. But it's the difficulty that we will always have to cope with in all cases. But I trust we will go somewhere. This is my intervention. I hope it's been useful. before moving on to the rest of the conference, I suggest that maybe we should have a debate. You have heard politicians, scientists, our legal experts. Bernard wanted to add something. Bernard, switch on your mic. Don't hesitate. You said that in Germany, before deciding, make a decision about a landfill site, security had to be guaranteed for a million years. I think I remember that. In the Haas mining site, it changed when they applied not the typical mining law, but nuclear law. And there is a participation of the general public there, much higher than elsewhere. And as far as Stockholm is concerned, there it's not about radioactive waste, but just to compare, because the French state is still sticks to the idea that confinement is the only possible idea and getting rid of the stock is not possible, while the Germans say the opposite. So I think it is thanks to the application of nuclear law, enforcement of nuclear law, that they adopted very long-term security guarantees. It's quite easy to translate a million years. Mr. Zinn should switch off his mic. There are very specific things to be said, but only this sentence, saying that you need security over a million years. Well, this sentence only is clear enough because no sincere scientist or expert can guarantee security for 1 million years. No one ever has written that sentence on a PowerPoint. We must guarantee the safety of the site, the security of the site for 1 million years. Yes, actually, I saw it on a PowerPoint, and I went to see the speaker, and the speaker told me, well, we went over the top a little bit. Nobody can guarantee anything in such a long run for so many years. So please send that to me, because it's enough. It's enough to demonstrate that they're in bad faith. Those who say that they can guarantee security long enough are lying. They will have to carry out a study to show, to prove, to give evidence of that guarantee of security for 1 million years. Do you have questions? I'm not sure it's a question, but I had a couple of things which I would like to say. I've been listening to everybody since the start, and I think words are important. The words we use have their weight. I'm in the parliament. I'm considered to be a visitor, not a French citizen, a visitor. So it shows how we're considered. I'm not speaking about politicians. We're all politicians. There are the elected politicians and the citizens. We're all involved in politics. And of course, it's all very interesting information, but we would need more concrete examples because it's a very heavy information to digest. I think it's important to show what are the possible results when we lodge a complaint, against state authorities. A government has legitimacy, and people hesitate to take action against their governments. A government, when you're elected to a government, it somehow means that you do what you want. These are We are the state and they are our representatives, but very often they don't really represent us. So they know how to distort the words. So I was speaking about it with the two ladies sitting beside me. We are committed citizens. When you speak about activists, it's like warriors, people waging war. 2 years ago, the temporary tenant of the Élysée Palace said, "We declare war." I think it's very important to use the right words to make sure that people don't feel under attack and for the message to be passed on in a clearer way. Very often words are used just to classify us among those who oppose something. We know that we're all here today because we are right, because it is meaningful for us to be here. We are right, as are those who govern us are taking another road far away from what is fair and what is good for us. We should really oppose them. It's very important that we should oppose them in defense of the things that are indeed good for us, for our planet, for our environment, and for our children. So let's beware of the words we use. Because if we oppose something, we can be called conspirationist in another field, as we've heard say so often. When we oppose government measures, we can be called conspirationists. So please introduce yourself. When you take the floor. My name is Gérard Avril. I live in Strasbourg. I have taken part in a struggle against a ring road around Strasbourg, and I'm sensitive to what is being discussed today because Bure is very close to the place where I was born, Saint-Dizier. A few things about what...
On vous a présenté comme citoyen quand même ici.
We said that you were citizens. And it's true that, in general, we do not have many citizens coming to the European Parliament to attend meetings. We mainly have stakeholders, as they are called. And for the France Insoumise and the Greens, we are very sensitive to involving citizens, and we have motivated, committed, concerned citizens. And I'm a member of parliament that is an activist, and I have no problem with that word, activist, because it means that we really want to fight and defend our ideas. This is how I have always been. Now, as to the legal issues, as I said before, this is my third mandate. At the beginning I thought that everything would change and move, but then you have blockages, and you have blockages coming from lobbyists, but not only from lobbyists. You also have political parties, politicians. This morning, when we had to vote on an amendment on the nuclear power, you had the EPP, the Conservatives, you had the Social Democrats, and they voted in favor of the nuclear power. They're not really looking into the objective aspects of the discussions. And afterwards, the only solution is justice. You talked about the affaire du siècle, where the French state was condemned, but we also turned to the European Court of Justice as European Parliament because we didn't have access to the studies that stipulated that glyphosate was not causing cancer. So we asked the Commission did not send us any response. Monsanto was not going to send us their studies, of course, and so we went to the courts, and we won that battle. And nowadays, if we have studies about health and environment, the studies are now public. So that was case law. And we did the same for the transparency of contracts and pharmaceutical laboratories. So this is the last resort, but it's very important. And today I'm delighted to have François with us, because I'd like to know if it's possible to block the system from a legal point of view. Because now we have this Espoo Convention and we have Greens that are in the governments in different member states, and we need to use them. In Luxembourg, you have the Minister for Energy, and he's doing a great job in Luxembourg to go against the taxonomy, to attack the taxonomy. And this comes from the Greens, or the equivalent of the France Insoumise party. Now, I do not want to focus on political parties only, but we have people around us that we need to use. We are not using them enough. And on the Espoo Convention, I believe we should turn to these people. You know, I'd like being pragmatic and concrete and practical. Sometimes I'm just getting tired and bored with all the speeches. We need to make sure that we have Greens and other people expressing their views in the government. We need to look at the Aarhus Convention about the access to documents. So what can we do? What can we ask? And what can we do to block the system? You know, I think this is war, really. The nuclear power is terrible. I have been against nuclear power for 40 years, and we had to struggle to fight to have access to information. And we thought, well, let's create our own information. That's why we set up a laboratory. It's important to have the power. And there are so many challenges. Cigéo is a huge project, and there's so much at stake. If it's successful, it will have consequences at European level, and it will tell people, show people that it is possible to manage nuclear waste even if we simply bury them. You know, there was a blockage around taxonomy in the past because there was this do no harm principle. Let's not harm the environment or future generations. There was this do no harm principle. You could not do harm to health with the explosion problems, etc. And normally, you should not be able to develop this energy if you cannot manage waste. And that's why we really need to make sure that we invest all of our energy to stop Cigéo. And we need to turn to the judicial system. All right. So Jean-Marie and you, and then you. I have to look at my watch to make sure that we still have some time. Yes, I do not want to be too long, but you were talking about European problems. And I tried to warn MEPs, but it was not really successful. Well, it's all right. But in this terrible project to melt metal waste coming from the whole of France in Fessenheim. Now, of course, these low-activity waste are still quite active waste. And the management of Fessenheim, EDF, sent to Sweden elements of previous reactors used in Fessenheim to carry out studies and to work on the reduction of volume and to process anything that you can imagine for the future techno center in Fessenheim. And they used the Rhine River. This is an international Rhine. They had to ask for authorizations to all neighboring countries. And we were talking about nuclear waste. And I would like to know what are the criteria that were used by European governments to authorize the free movement of that type of waste. Thank you. And this is an investigation we should launch, and I don't know how. Yes, and this is a question to be put to the Commission in writing. Well, yes, thank you very much. Now I know what I need to do. Thank you. Hello, my name is Tony Monari. I'm part of alternative projects to the nuclear power. And I would like to talk about the reaction of the public because we had fake consultation processes with Bure. And people spent hours and hours to collect information and to prepare a file. And then it was simply buried. And I would like to know what we can do to make sure that this does not happen again. Thank you. Would you like to take the floor? Thank you. To make sure that this does not happen again, we do have provisions in the Code for the Environment stating that the public opinion should be taken into account in the decision-making process. So that's the first thing. I guess you're also referring to the consultations upstream, but normally authorities should take these opinions into consideration. So that's a first idea. And that's why we're trying to fight. And of course, this is not going to answer your question directly, but we're trying to make sure that the public can really intervene as soon as possible before decisions are made. And the problem here is that you're being consulted, but we know that the decision was made a long time ago, even though this will never be stated officially. But this is something that we have seen in different files, in different cases, and people will tell you, no, but you're being consulted and we're really interested in your opinion. Your opinion is very important. But actually, we know that the changes you can make are just minor changes, not changes about the substance of the case and about the avoidance, the reduction. It's important to avoid the impact on the environment, and that's where the problem lies. So from a very practical view, I would say that in the future, for future consultations, we should try to have a coordination. But this is something that you're already doing. So coordination with other associations, other people who are active, in order to express your views. But it's not easy to give you a full answer to that question. I'm very sorry. Yes, about this consultation, we can say that for Cigéo or EPR2 projects for future reactors, there are two types of consultations. And both of them are legal consultations. The first one is organized by the developer. So the French National Agency for Radioactive Waste Management, Andra, can say, I'm going to organize a consultation. And then Andra will turn to a company with animators, moderators who are well paid. And this will simply be an information meeting because Andra will make a presentation about the project, 1, 2, 3 presentations, and then the public can ask questions online or in physical meetings. The questions are sorted by the moderators and the answers are provided by Andra. And the conclusion is that this is an information session organized by the developer who simply tells you that the project is great. But that's fake consultation. And I had the opportunity to take part to these sessions and I decided to refuse the invitation and never to attend these types of consultations. They're legal. The law authorizes developers and project owners to organize such sessions. And then you have people from CNDP who are supposed to supervise the process and who can intervene, but they will simply intervene to say that you have to remain polite, and that's all. They will not intervene about the substance. Then, on the other hand, you have the National Council for Public Discussions and Consultations, and they have rules, and they're quite good. And opponents have the right to speak up and to express their views. And the conclusions of these discussions are correct. The problem is that nobody cares about these opinions. At the parliament level or at the government level, these opinions are not taken into account. So that's a shame, but this is the situation we're in. The alternate solution, and what you could do, would be to organize meetings. So these meetings would be organized by national associations, local associations, territorial associations. You would organize these meetings yourselves. You could establish a link with the public opinion and publish the result of these discussions without having the intervention of Andra or the EDF. And this would be a counterpower to this well-organized system. Well, it's not possible to take part to debates and exchanges because these are fake consultations. And after years and years of discussions, I believe it's always better for citizens to organize their own meetings, and they can invite whoever they want. They can share information that will be relevant information and correct information compared to the information provided by the project developers. Yes, there are two other requests for the floor. Go ahead. Yes, I'll be very brief. I would like to thank you. And I would like to thank ELV and AFI because from an environmental point of view, you were able to put this on the table, and that's very important for the future. However, I do have some regrets because we only have people who are against Cigéo and against the nuclear power here today. And I thought that this would be an information session. I thought that we would have people who are in favor of Cigéo. And unfortunately, we only have people against the project. And there were several fake arguments. Can you hear me? Angélique? Yes, please. I would like to conclude. Please. May I? I would like to finish, to conclude. You were giving fake arguments. You said that we didn't know what would be included in Cigéo, but that's wrong. And these fake arguments are never questioned or challenged. And that's really disturbing because, you know, you have the same logics, the same approach as in meetings against vaccines, for example. But you also have people from Finland who are in favor of the nuclear power, people from the ELV and the parliaments. Could you please conclude? Could you please finish? Yes. So you have Greens, European Greens, that are in favor of the nuclear power. And I would like to invite all of the people here who want to defend the environment. I'm not saying that you should be in favor of the nuclear power. I'm just saying that you should take into account all the arguments and to challenge the fake arguments that we heard and try to look for information. I'm at your disposal. I'm sorry because I didn't introduce myself. My name is Gauthier Keane. Angélique, I'm going to moderate the discussions. My name is Gauthier Keane. Yes, I'm sorry because I have to interrupt because I don't care whether some people from the ELV are against or for the project. So you didn't comply with the rules, so I would like to give the floor now to other people. Thank you. My name is Jan Flory. I'm the spokesperson of a group called Destockamine, meaning destocking. And I'm delighted to hear our speakers talking about the little brother of Cigéo. This is what you said. Stockamine is 30 years of struggle against a project that was presented to us as a storage project for waste. And I found a text in 91 saying storage does not mean destocking, because actually this is a project focusing on burial. And I'm delighted to hear Mr. Laponche explaining that burial is just a big mistake. And we have been supported ever since the fire, because Stockamine was a failure, a social failure. I'm not going to tell you about the lies we heard about job creation. And it was a moral failure, an environmental failure, with a pollution of the groundwater table. Everyone is recognizing this. This is a moral failure because we have a state that was not able to manage the situation. And we hear the same promises for Cigéo. So we heard lies, and we're no longer talking about reversibility now. They're telling us about the recoverability. So they're playing with words. They're making fun of us. They're playing with us. And I would like to say that Cigéo will be a failure, as Stockamine was a failure. The only solution was de-storage, and storage with recoverable waste that we can control and supervise, and for which we can reduce the toxic level, the toxicity. And of course, the easiest waste to manage is the waste that is not produced. And I would like to come back to what Marie Toussaint said. I believe that the law can win, and I would like to thank François Zin for his victories in Stockamine. I no longer trust the state, but I do trust justice and law. Thank you.
Super. Si on est encore dans un état de droit. À vous.
If we're still in the rule of law, last intervention, because then we have another intervention about application. Thank you for inviting us. We're in the times of fission, but a few months ago we succeeded to implement nuclear fusion, so we can hope that that waste will be reprocessed one day. Why don't we speak anymore about reversibility, but about recoverability? How about Cigéo? And how about the projects and studies in the different European countries? Is reversibility being studied, or only recovery? And why isn't it considered at the Cigéo level, at the level of Cigéo? Reversibility is the possibility, once you have started filling the storage place. So in 2100, let's say that the government then and scientists realize that this solution, the landfilling solution, is very complicated, and that another solution has been found. Let's imagine that another solution has been found, and the decision is made to get the waste out in order to apply another method to that waste. That's reversibility. The decision is made, and at some point it is reversible. So in the Cigéo project, there would be a pilot phase during a first period. The first period will be for building and storage, but at some point, after some time, there would be a vote by the parliament. And then reversibility would be applied, which means not continuing storage That's the definition of reversibility. But it's very theoretical. When you have put your waste in the galleries of the project,
just as it happened in the American storage facilities, well, one of the packages is faulty. And after some time, we realized that the container was damaged and there are radioactive leaks. Then it's very important to recover that package. That's recovery possibility. Recoverability. Reversibility is in principle possible immediately. So if you load or store your package, if you realize that it's a bad quality package, then you can withdraw it. But if it is loaded with so many other packages, one after another, well, in practice, you cannot recover the one that is faulty. It goes down. It is first brought downward, down into the ground. And then there are galleries, and in the galleries, there are alveoli. And in those alveoli, you just store your packages. If you deposit your package and realize it is faulty after unloading another 10, it will be impossible to recover it, especially if there is a leak. So the two questions arise: the reversibility, the possibility of changing our minds if we realize that technically it's not so good, or if, for example, we realize at some point that there are other possible solutions that are better. That's reversibility. Recoverability means that if there is an incident related to a package of waste, it's the possibility to recover it. It's something you cannot find in any of the most advanced storage facilities. Finland, for example, is filling tubes. And the spent fuel, irradiated fuel, is poured into the tube. It is then closed, and the gallery is filled with these tubes. So it is recoverable immediately. If when you stick it down into the shaft, you realize there is a leak, then you can take it out. But if it's later on, after filling the shaft with more tubes, it becomes impossible. You cannot recover the faulty one. And just afterwards, I'll stop in my technical explanation. In the Finland and Sweden solutions, the waste goes down in lifts. It is vertical. While Cigéo, in the Cigéo case, the waste goes down a slope, not vertically. And there are geological differences and design differences in the protective structure of the waste. So we can discuss about reversibility and recoverability in both cases. If you look at the reports as to reversibility and recoverability, it's not proven at all, but it will be tested in the pilot phase. The point is to find out for how long. There is a very large number of uncertainties. So we're going to make trials, make tests. But during the time in which we make tests, the building works continue. If you continue the building works, well, it's obvious that you will use the construction. Diolabat from the degrowth movement from Nancy. I'm part of those who are against. The Hippocrates oath already said do no harm. That notion exists since then. By destroying the environment, you destroy the population. The Bure population will be exiled from their own place. And Lévi-Strauss in 1952 spoke about the rights of indigenous people. There is a law that governs the rights of indigenous people. I don't know if it's part of the European toolbox, but it is part of human law. Nuclear waste are the last bits of modern capitalism which are discarded. It relates us to political resistance because men go to the streets to do politics. Rivarol said that. And I'm speaking on behalf of all those activists, all those resistants who are against the destruction of the environment and the destruction of the populations. So there is anger among the citizens. It produces anger. So I'm not going to speak for any longer. We are in a Promethean society based on extracting resources, producing, consuming, producing waste. Extractivism, productivism, consumption, and waste production. And that's the basis for industrial capitalist society. And so it's a vicious circle. And that Promethean society, I would end up with one element. The human species has invented a fire that cannot be extinguished, that cannot be put out. That's the pride of sin. They have invited nuclear fire, a fire they cannot put out. They cannot extinguish. The anthropological approach. There is something to be said about the environmental assessment. And I would like to give the floor to Martin Paquin and Simon Sivron-Gatin. Maxime, sorry, who is going to tell us about the opinion about the Cigéo project of the Environmental Authority. I'm quite impressed to be in front of all of you. And I got up very early this morning. I'm Simon. I've been an activist in Bure for the last 2 years. I've been trained in international law. I'm Maxime Paquin. I'm working for France Nature and Environment. So we are going to present here the analysis of the environmental impact assessment. And we are going to compare this with the requirements of European law and the opinion of the European Environmental Authority. So I would like to tell you about the main loopholes because there are so many of them. So François told us a lot about this. There are the conventions, the Espoo and Aarhus Convention. We find part of this legislation, part of the conventions, and the aspects related to the participation of the general public, the involvement of the general public. We can consider that the declaration of public interest is the first permission that is given. And what we're going to look at is whether this DUP Cigéo situation responds to the requirements of the Directive 2011-92 UE. Next slide, please. So we're going to look at the environmental assessment, which in French law is called impact assessment study, but it's called evaluation at the European level. So it is all the results of these evaluations are submitted to the environmental authority, which is related with the inspection service. But it normally guarantees a certain degree of independence in the evaluation of the project. So that authority provides opinions about the evaluations of the impacts of major projects on the environment. And they also give their opinion about the measures meant to avoid, reduce, or compensate the impact on the environment. The Cigéo opinion has been given in January 2021. They say, generally speaking, environmental stakes are not taken into account in an adequate way, and they focus particularly on security and risk management, risk control. They speak about the international consultation mechanism arises, and this clearly refers to the Espoo Convention. So they seem to say that neighboring countries would have to be consulted. So these now the main loopholes of the environmental impact assessment or evaluation according to the directive. So there are 4 different blocks of loopholes: uncertainties about the design dimensions, the faults in the evaluation of impact on the environment, the risks of major accidents, and the feasibility and the alternative to the landfill. The first block means looking at the design and the dimensions, the size of Cigéo. The directive demands that the project promoters provide information about the design, the dimensions, and other relevant characteristics of the project. Just to remind you of what Cigéo is, because we don't even realize very often, and we find it difficult to describe the project. It's not just a small hole where we drop a few packs of radioactive waste. It is an unprecedented project at the European level. The waste is going to be landfill buried 500 meters deep. It will be 270 kilometers of galleries, more than the Parisian subway. It will occupy 30 square kilometers, same surface as a city like Lille. The project will be operated for 100 years. Just to give you an idea of the dimension of this project, it is not a small project. It's never been done to such a scale. Let's look at the design. The authorities say that there are uncertainties about the nature and the amount of waste. So we don't really know what kind of waste is going to be buried in the framework of Cigéo. The Nuclear Enforcement Agency says that producers have not given evidence of the feasibility of designing the design of the packages that would be sent to Cigéo, and they have not demonstrated the feasibility of their transport, because there is a certain type of waste that produces hydrogen, and it's a serious issue, and it's only one among many. So they don't actually know how to package them to make sure they don't create issues. So whether they are included or not, whether that kind of waste is included or not, determines the design of the project. So they don't really know how to design the project because they are not sure of the kind of waste that will be landfilled there. So the amount of waste is also uncertain. But there is a note here from the Andra that dates back to July 2021, and they say, well, no problem if we relaunched nuclear energy. The waste coming from that nuclear energy can be landfilled in Cigéo. There'll be an impact on design and size of the installations plus an increased radiological impact. But the problem is that at the moment of the environmental evaluation of the project, it is said we need all the information about the size, the design of the project, but we don't have them because we don't know the nature and the amount of waste that will be landfilled there. What the directive demands is that there should be an exhaustive evaluation of the impacts of a project, whether the direct, indirect impacts, combined impacts, cross-border impacts. There is a jurisprudence of the European Court of Justice which is quite interesting and which says that even though the project is fractioned in time or in space, or in case of many contractors, the intervention of many contractors, which is the case of Cigéo because Andra is responsible for surface and underground installations, but there are also a road diversion, which depends on another authority. There is a railway rehabilitation, and the national railway company is responsible. There is a water supply system, which depends on another contractor. So that's the picture. And what the environmental authority says that all those operations are still being studied. And they notice that the evaluation presented by Andra is not exhaustive. For example, the initial environmental impact assessment and the information provided by the road diversion, the water supply, electric lines, electric cables, power cables, well, all these have not been clearly and precisely described. So, the biodiversity impact assessment, the initial biodiversity evaluation is not properly done and properly analyzed. There is a lack of information about drinking water for the inhabitants because the Cigéo project is going to consume huge amounts of water because they'll have to produce huge amounts of concrete. So there is a need for pumping the water in the galleries because there will be leaks of water into the galleries, and that water would be rejected into the environment, into the surrounding rivers, and could eventually land in the underground water that is used by the population. So there is no specific measurement about the impact on water, the surrounding water streams, and underground water. So there are also uncertainties about the storage of the 11 million cubic meters of material that will have to be excavated. So the Andra says, well, we're going to look for places where we can bury that material. We're going to look for quarries around the Bure. But there is no certainty. All the impacts should have been carefully studied already. So there is an awful lot of loopholes and uncertainties. So I'll stop here and I'll give the floor to Simon for the rest. Next slide. So now it's a very important topic. Risks of major accidents. It is one of the points which is of particular interest. The DUP case, which is considered by the French state to be the first authorization, the first clearance in the meaning of the European Directive. Well, they should give evidence of the security, and no evidence is given about security, no guarantees given about security. There is a distinction to be made between nuclear safety and nuclear security. Nuclear safety means keeping the integrity of radioactive waste. And nuclear security is the protection measures of installations and radioactive waste. As far as safety is concerned, the environmental authority says on page 5 that in the DUP file there is no safety or security report. So the DUP doesn't say anything about how the project is put in place and the authorization of the project. They don't say anything to the clearance given to the project. And the problem is the safety evaluation has been based on data which is no longer valid, especially in relation with the uncertainties we were speaking about.
Quand même des éléments de manière générale.
Then, about safety and security, there are elements that are analyzed from a cross-cutting point of view, especially when it comes to design, but for the environmental authority, it's not sufficient. First, the authority considers that the soil stability was not studied sufficiently, and they're asking to look into the seismic risk. Following the Tay event in the south of France, this really challenged the seismic map in France. And it's really interesting to see that we had an earthquake in Alsace recently, and it was felt all the way to 30 kilometers away from the site in Bure. So that's the issue about soil stability. Then there is a risk of accidents and what should be done in the case of accident. And the environmental authority believes that these risks of accidents have been underestimated, especially when it comes to the functioning of the buildings in case of an earthquake or an accident. Then the reversibility or recoverability was not demonstrated, especially in the case of accidents. So IRSN highlights that this recoverability after accident is not demonstrated. And that's the institute managing the exit of the nuclear power. And then some of you may have heard about the geothermal potential in Bure. This was discussed, and nowadays we can say that the consensus is that there is such a geothermal potential, but we're talking about the scale of that potential. Because for the environmental authority, this is an element that would be essential. So there should be no geothermal potential. Otherwise, people could come and drill in the area 200 of years from now and find radioactive waste. So the environmental authority would like an independent study to be carried out, because questions were raised about the analysis that were carried out. So this is an issue that is quite important about security, but it's covered quite lightly in the file. And we were told that it would be analyzed in depth in the future. Next slide, please. So let's go back to the issue of safety. So here we combined safety and the surveillance of installations. So it's supervising the building to make sure that there are no attacks or no interventions. But this is simply put aside in the file. We guess that this will be covered in the future, that this will be part of the safety demonstration for future authorizations. But this is a fundamental issue if we want to look at the risk of major accidents and disasters. For the long-term surveillance and supervision, and to guarantee the safety while you're building the burial site, but also after the closing. And that will be in a very long time, actually, 2150. But the environmental authority believes that this question has not been tackled, and that's a problem because the dismantling operations and the long-term supervision operations should be taken into account now, because they could have an impact on the decisions to be made now about the territory. Because what will happen in 2150? Will we make sure that someone stays there? For how long? Are we going to build a billboard or a sign? So this is a very long project, and you really need to look into this issue. I believe that we could expect a very serious file, and the environmental authority states that this long-term supervision cannot be put aside. It should be taken into account right now. And this long-term issue is related to the memory of the site and the transmission of that memory. Because indeed, it's quite difficult to wonder how we can warn future generations so that they do not open the radioactive waste box. You know, throughout history, some messages were conveyed, but each time the meaning was changed. If you look at the myths that came from history, the meaning has always changed. So we can really have questions about the meaning of the message that we would convey to future generations about radioactive waste. So we can see that all these safety and security issues have been put aside, even though decisions have been made about the project and its location. And we can see that the implications on society will be huge. And this comes back to the use of nuclear plants as targets in the case of conflicts of wars. We can really wonder how we can be prepared for such events and conflicts. And I'd like to hand over to my colleague again. Are you finished? We still have 2 slides and then it's over. So on this slide, there are 2 important topics. The first one is about alternate solution to burying radioactive waste, and the directive states that during the environmental assessment, the project owner should explain what are the substitution solutions that are reasonable. So you need to have these substitution solutions, and Andra, the French National Agency, prepared a table with the pros and cons of each solution. But there is a but. All the other solutions are put aside quite quickly. And they chose burying waste because this would enable the protection of waste if companies are not able to control the accumulation of waste, so burying waste would be easier compared to dry storage. But actually the environmental authority states that it is always important to control the management of waste, whether they are stored with dry techniques or whether they are buried. Now, several reports were produced by the IRSN in 2019 about radioactive waste, and in that report there is a list of alternatives to burial, and Bernard talked about this dry storage solution, and they looked into the feasibility of this solution, and they say that they should have carried out more in-depth studies about these solutions. And then there is an opinion of the SGPI. This is a secretariat that is related to the Prime Minister, and they gave an opinion about Cigéo. They looked at the pros and cons of each solution, and in their opinion, they say that there are major risks when it comes to costs. And they say that this could challenge the relevance of the burial solution compared to the dry storage solution. So some people say that burying waste is not the best solution according to different parameters. So why should we rush things? Why shouldn't we wait and go on with research to see whether there could be other alternatives that would be less hazardous and dangerous? And then the last question is the project feasible? And there's a doubt about environmental authority. And of course, you can find all this information. You can see the references to the pages in the document. So please go ahead and read the opinion. You'll see that we haven't invented anything. We may have poorly summarized the opinion of the environmental authority, but we haven't made up anything. We've talked about what happened in Stockamine, in Hasse, and we can also mention the accidents that happened in the United States. And there was a collective report by the IRSN that concludes that the problems were related to material, organizational, and human shortcomings or failures. So that's a lot for this type of storage. So as a conclusion, there is no demonstration showing that Cigéo is a feasible project and that this is the best solution compared to other alternatives. And I would like to hand over to Simon for the real conclusion. Yes, just one very last word. For the environmental authority, we can consider that this project is vague, uncertain, that the environmental assessment is not comprehensive, and that there are many issues related to safety, security, and risk management that haven't been covered. And this is why some other projects were stopped. But this public utility authorization was granted, and during the first work, actually, you will not have all the authorizations. So we can see that the project will be launched without those authorizations. And of course, this is a huge industrial project. It's the biggest in Europe, and it will go beyond any other human experience. And of course, we can carry out experiments and we can go all the way to the doubt with the limitations of current knowledge. But here we're looking at a very long-term project, and the consequences of the management decisions, whether we store them, we bury them, the consequences will be huge. And it will be impossible to measure them, and it will be impossible to guess what will happen. So this is the most presumptuous an overconfident project in history, so it should go hand in hand with a comprehensive impact assessment, and it was not the case. And we can mention the last recommendation of the Environmental Authority, stating that in view of the nature of the project and the uncertainties about long-term risks, it would be rational to try to limit sustainably the number of the population exposed to that risk. So it means that it's better to stay away from the project. And then the deliberation of the Municipal Council of Bure also said that they were not favorable to the project, saying that the village of Bure would die crushed by Andra. So these are very strong words, and it really demonstrates the real face of that project and of the nuclear industry in general. They are against democracy, colonialists, and I believe it is important to go against this denial of democracy because, of course, all they want to do is to relaunch this industry, and they're not thinking about future generations. Thank you. And thank you very much for organizing the meeting. I would like to thank all the people who organized this meeting today. Well, thank you very much. Well, thank you. I would like to thank Maxime and Simon for their intervention, because in this opinion, we actually have all the arguments about feasibility. Can you imagine this? The Environment Authority is wondering whether this is feasible. They're wondering whether we have enough guarantees about safety and security, and they're saying, actually, we do not have enough guarantees. So what more are you looking for? We have come to the limits of our democratic system, and this made me think about taxonomy, because we have all the arguments, but they're still moving ahead with this steamroller, which is Andra. And what about the president and the government? Whatever the scientific arguments, they want to do it. They want to go ahead with it. And this is what I see with the Commission. And they also have the Euratom Treaty. They have this treaty next to the European treaties. And so the Parliament is not involved. Member states are to make the decisions hand in hand with the Commission, and this has been the case ever since 1957. So this is what you said, Bernard. I believe it is important to adopt the same strategy as for shale gas. And I come from the Drôme region. When people from Ardèche heard that there would be drilling operations, and they saw the videos, and they saw that it could set fire to the installations, people in Ardèche said, no, we don't want this. And there were thousands of people in all villages, and they didn't have to go to court because there was such pressure coming from the population. So all politicians from all political parties said no. And the right parties actually said there will be no shale gas in France. So everything is possible if we want to win. Now, we're trying to win battles on all systems, but I believe that the mobilization of citizens is the most important thing. You were talking about being a citizen. And of course, we can also go to court and use legal arguments, but we have all the arguments already. Now, Bernard, would you like to draw the conclusions? Because we're coming to the conclusions of this event. We're slightly behind schedule. You heard many things. So what's your vision? What do you think? Well, there's something that came to mind recently, and that's stupid. I could have thought about this before, but because of what happened this summer with the storms and the drought and the IPCC report, you know, all these projects were designed in the years 2000, and everything that is stated by the Environmental Authority is related to the current situation. We have a water problem. We have many issues to tackle. And the same goes with the presentations about the EPR2 by EDF. But let's think about the current situation. For a project such as Cigéo, we should not only take into account the current situation or the past situation with the earthquakes we had. We know what is the scenario presented by IPCC in 2050 and 2100. We know that there will be dramatic changes. So we really have to think about the way we build things. And we know that we should no longer build houses next to the sea, close to the sea. And so if you have EPR2 reactors next to the sea, you can't do that because the sea level is going to rise. Let's imagine the storms, tornadoes around Cigéo project. I'm not even thinking of conflicts and wars. Look at the water issues. They said that they had 3 miserable rivers and they will no longer have water. They will need water all the time for concrete. Then there will be storms destroying the electrical system. They will no longer have electricity, so it will be the end of Cigéo because they need a permanent power supply in the galleries, etc. So if you review the project, looking at the current situation, you can then study the same situation in 2050 and you will see that even if they say that some things are correct today, they will no longer be correct in the future because you will not have water anymore, fresh water. You will have water coming from storms, floods. Remember the permanent ventilation story. It can only stop during 1 week or 10 days maximum. So just imagine the climatic conditions we'll have. We will have more than 1 week of interruption of electricity in the future. So I believe that's very important, and people need to understand that. Such a heavy project needs to be reviewed in light of the climate change that are coming. Because now people know what it is to have fire, floods, drought, and scarcity of water. This is what I wanted to say. This would be my comment, because we have to review all of this in the light of the forecasts for the future, because of course we're not going to solve climate change overnight. Well, thank you very much for this new approach, because indeed it completely challenges the projects as they were presented. Would you like to add something? Yes, I would like to say that you are totally right, Bernard, to talk about the failure of the ventilation system, because I believe that this is one of the accidents that happened. We didn't have the time to look into all the details, but we were looking at these accidents, and in the WIP, the ventilation system stopped during 1 year or 2 years. It was very long, so it was much more than just those 10 days. All right, so I would like to hand over now to, but the mic is off.
Géraldine, voilà, je vais pas.
I'm going to give the floor now to Géraldine, who's the regional councillor of the Grand Est, so she's directly involved indeed. So it's been very well said. I'm not going to come back to this, but the opinion of the environmental authority that was brought at the time of the declaration of public interest to face the citizens. Well, the opinion of the environmental authority is disastrous, and it's not. I'm not being dogmatic. All this is substantiated. At the regional level, when we were shown the text of the declaration of public interest, we were told Andra has entered has responded to the environmental authority. These are the links that have been made available to you. And those links have never worked. And it's something we said at the time of the vote. So there was no reply of Andra to the opinions of the environmental authority. When you are elected, whether you're a citizen or an elected politician, and you have to vote in favor of a project without having all the information, that is pure forgetfulness, pure madness. We spoke about the drought of this summer, and these conditions are changing, and the Andra studies do not take into account those changes due to droughts. The lake, the Gérardmer Lake, was used to provide drinking water to the population. For the first time, we could not have imagined this 5 years ago. In a city, it's been considered to supply water in tanks with trucks in order to provide drinking water to the citizens. That's where we are, and now nobody takes into account the opinion of the environmental authority. Why do elected politicians vote in favor of the project? Because they're being promised that there'll be economic development, jobs created. There is no such economic development. And the environmental authority says it too. They say that many economic stakeholders don't dare settle in that area because they are afraid that there might not be enough people left in the area after such a project. So, as to the environmental health and the impact on health, how are we going to be able to measure today the impacts on health with the Cigéo storage when we have no benchmark? Because if we want to measure something, we need to have previous data, but no data has been provided to us about the sanitary situation around the Bure. There are loopholes in the information and in the environmental study. We heard that there were Espoo and Aarhus directives that enabled us to broaden the debate and bring it to the European level, but the Grand Est, Bure, is 160 kilometers away from Belgium. It is a cross-border area, if there ever was one. But Bure is also Stockamin. It is also the use of coal-associated gas. So the impact on our European neighbors is not small. And when we say that our European neighbors have to be questioned about that, it can also be a regional consultation. And in the Grand Est Regional Council, we work on this because regional elected politicians will have to respond to the population. We mentioned the MPs, we mentioned activists, without whom we might not be here today. But we also need to speak about the local elected politicians, municipal elected politicians, district level elected politicians, or regional elected politicians. They might be closer to population, and when the population asks them questions about what happens afterwards, even though they may have had to give up their responsibility there, they will have to respond to the population. They will have to respond to the citizens. They will have to be accountable. We need the network, the European network, the citizens network, the activist network to express the demands that the environmental impact studies should be made clearer. The questions raised by the environmental authority should be answered, but it's not up to the citizens or the activists to find alternative solutions to solve the problem of nuclear waste. When we say nowadays that there is a problem, people usually say, well, okay, but what kind of solution do you propose? Well, we haven't asked for the problem. Let's all together find acceptable solutions and discuss those solutions when they are really acceptable. I think we had an overview of the different perspectives on the issue today. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Geraldine. I would like to thank so many people. I'm thinking about Angélique, Irene, Regine, all these people who never stop, because keeping the flame, keeping up the mobilization requires a lot of energy and a lot of devotion. So thank you very much to you all, the fighters. So many ways have been explored. Well, it's French play on words, not translatable. Well, it's very important that people should be constantly aware of what the situation is, because it's a pharaonic project. It's a unique project. It's one of those huge, useless projects. If it is implemented, if it becomes a reality, it has to be shown that it's a total denial of democracy. It is a denial of science. So we have to bugger them on this. We have to harass them. We have to mob them. We will have to do that. It will be not the same kind of harassment, because we will demand safety studies, security studies. We need them to anticipate all the risks, and at least what will happen in 2050 and 2100, what Bernard has been saying, is very important. It is as if they're reasoning as if we were going to be in the same situation in 2050, despite the UNFCCC report. They're completely has been. They're obsolete. And if they want their project, well, they need our money to carry out this project. So we have to harass them. And there is a need for citizens' mobilization. I was telling you about shale gas. When it came to shale gas, I was surprised by the mobilization of citizens. And I was thinking, well, if we had that same kind of mobilization against nuclear power, well, it would be great. And this mobilization has led to a political decision. We need to show now that nuclear power is obsolete, because we speak about Cigéo, but if we want to stop Cigéo, we have to stop producing radioactive waste. We have to stop building 6 EPR, and we have to stop the building of 8 more, maybe EPR3 or the SMRs, whatever it is, even EPR3. But the main concern is that we need to put an end to this system, because we're being disinformed by the nuclear lobby, who constantly say, well, decarbonated energy, nuclear energy, and so on. We have to regain power and prevent them from disinforming people. I can feel that every day. And we also have work to do at the European Parliament. We have to appeal to those committees about the Espoo and Aarhus Conventions. And we should also lodge a complaint to the Petty Commission for non-respect of the directive, the Petitions Committee. If we complain to the Petitions Committee, we can certainly induce a debate about this. I'm very happy about this debate we've had. There are prospects, we have openings, and we're very far from having lost the battle, because This project is completely disproportionate, and we have to talk to our politicians, to our elected politicians, and tell them, answer those questions, because you are going to take us into a dead end today and also future generations. Billions and billions are going to be spent for this useless project. They speak about 35, 45 billion. The EPR moved from 3 billion to reach 19 billion right now. And then they get finicky about a few thousand euros and prevent people from having a decent working wage, living wage. So let's regain power and let's work together with the citizens who are aware of the issues and those who struggle in the field, who fight, really fight. May I finish with my conclusion? I'm Marie-Jeanne Vincent. I'm an old activist. What do we do if tomorrow morning they want to start the works, the building works? We saw that with the forest, la forêt. Who will stand in front of the bulldozers? Not only us. How many hands are willing to raise? All the local elected politicians who feel responsible, who are accountable, should be with us. So you, elected politicians, mayors, go beyond the power we gave you. Fulfill your duty as citizens and help us. I entirely agree with you.